Hello and welcome to today's discussion with Legerity. I'm Mike Wilson, the moderator for today, and I'm delighted to be joined by two industry thought leaders sharing their perspective and insights on regulation, transformation and innovation for finance operations. Welcome to Elizabeth Sipiere, Chief Revenue Officer at Legerity, and our guest on today's chat, Lisa Wardlaw, Executive Strategic Advisor at Legerity. In today's show, we'll be discussing the countdown to IFRS 17, ESG and the role of finance, and then building on some of these themes, exploring the vision and future for transformation in the markets. So to get us underway, Elizabeth, could you introduce yourself, your role, and introduce Legerity for our audience, please?
Yes, of course. I'm Elizabeth Sipiere and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Legerity. And really my role is about helping our clients and prospects, work out what is the best way to solve their problems, usually between their core systems and finance, and build something really successful. And then, of course, I also look after them once they've got through an initial project and in full implementation, and then ongoing, building ever better finance solutions.
Amazing, thank you. And Lisa, a warm welcome to the UK, to London. You're over for the InsurTech conference this week, so I'm going to probably touch up. But Lisa, introduce yourself, maybe your background and your role at Legerity would be great, please.
Thank you for having me. Lisa Wardlaw. I recently joined Legerity as a Chief Strategic Executive Advisor, focusing on helping really bring that awareness of the awesome capabilities of Legerity into the market. My background, CFO. I've been a CFO at a subsidiary of Zurich Insurance Group, as well as I was the CFO at Munich Re, which is one of the largest reinsurers in the world. And in both of those environments, I went through several what we call ERP, accounting system modernizations, implementations, climbing your way to the top. So my passion in the strategic advisory space is really ensuring that digital strategies are now able to take advantage of cutting edge technologies.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to stay with you, Lisa, if I may, on the subject of IFRS 17. It's been front of mind for all these insurance. There's a deadline. Could you maybe just recap IFRS 17 for our audience and what it is and why these deadlines are important and what's happening this year?
Yeah, and on that, I remember going back to when it was still IFRS 4 phase 2. So we've been counting this down literally for decades now. Yes. But no, the time is here, right? So it's really we all have to finish our implementation in 2022, and we have to go live in 2023, and go live with a full comparative balance sheet, and all of and I think let me pin that for a moment. One of the core differentiators about IFRS 17 is it really inverts the entire insurance realm from being P&L focused to being balance sheet focused. And so, I say that the countdown is here, it's actually coming. And associated with that, we have probably a longevity of continued transition and transformation associated thereof. So reporting, annual statements, disclosures, because even though we have I'll call it our minimum go live baseline, we then are going to have to actually inherently adopt that into the kind of the living, breathing organism that we know as financial reporting.
Brilliant. So this balance sheet reporting, the importance of everything is happening from a structural way of reporting and stuff. Elizabeth, is it too late? The deadline's counting. So what would you say to folk out there who maybe haven't got their IFRS 17 plans in place, and also touch on how Legerity might be able to help with this?
It is late, but I think we're very fortunate. People like Lisa and some of our other customers that have been doing this for a couple of years, they've worked through so many issues. They've solved how you do this piece of accounting. They've worked with the IASB on the standard, and it's kind of at last reached some final definition. So most things are pretty settled, and the market has made decisions around how to replicate the standard in your policies and processes, and of course in your financial solutions. And that means for Legerity that we've actually been able to create package solutions. We pretty well, for a general insurer, we can get them live within 3 or 4 months, which, when the standard was brand new and nobody knew how to treat it, and every single one of the big four had a slightly different interpretation, it wasn't quite so easy. And as Lisa says, you need to get your numbers out for January 2023, and then after that, you can improve, you can absorb it into the organisation. So we feel quite confident, actually. We've got people who are still making their decisions, and I expect that will be the case for another couple of months, actually.
So returning to you, Lisa, again, this structural change, it's a regulation. Why is this regulation important? What will it change in the marketplace when people adhere to this?
Well, that could be a whole show in and of itself. We might need to swap out the water for something stronger. On a very serious note, I would say the importance of this, right? And I don't know how many people reflect or remember this. I was around when all this was being implemented. When insurers adopted international accounting standards, there was no accounting standard for insurance accounting. So in the vacancy of that accounting standard, we deferred to principle-based accounting, which the standard tells us to do. And in that vacancy, we have insurers all over the world selecting hybrids or deferring to local adaptations. So there's all these differences in the marketplace. And I would say most of them are following some form of, I can say this in American, like US GAAP twist, you know, like, yeah, we kind of like didn't like this part of US GAAP, but we kept that part. So, right, it's this very incongruent body of accounting right now. So the entire world has been waiting on this accounting standard. And whether you subscribe to it or not, it is supposed to be solvency focused, principle based, and it's really supposed to focus now on, you know, margin and a reset of margin iteratively, which is when we'll get into systems discussions, things that are actually quite important. And again, as I already mentioned, kind of tipped my hat on this one earlier, it really changes this P&L, and then the balance sheet falls out to the balance sheet is like your actual transactional statement of accounting, and the P&L falls out, which so it's kind of like which changes all of our budgeting and forecasting and all that. So very exciting.
So I'm going to build on it in a moment. I'm going to return to you maybe just to double click a little bit more detail about Aegon. So Lisa touched on US GAAP reporting, you know, different revenues happening in different regions. But Aegon was a great case study of how they tackled elements of IFRS 17. Would you just elaborate on that for our audience, please, as a case study for Legerity?
Do you know, we've done a lot of work with Aegon, and we've done it in a lot of countries. The first one we started, I think, was the Aegon UK people, and they've done it. And actually, very, very interesting, they've gone live, not with IFRS 17 because it's not due, but they've gone live with expense allocation because, you know, when you're addressing one problem, you can actually tidy up something else with the same sort of technology. And then, of course, we did Aegon SEE, which is, you know, Romania, Poland, Turkey, many other countries, and of course, Hong Kong as well. So what you've got in Aegon is you've got a group that has many entities that actually, you know, have been a habit of doing slightly different processes and procedures who are trying to move into a core. So, I mean, the joy of the Aegon project, as we've said before, was really harmonious project management, coherent organisation, collaborative working. You know, that's what really makes for success, because we're really talking about quite a lot of change for a lot of culturally quite different parts of the organisation, and software that can enable them to do it. You know, that is easy to use. You can see your results. You can play with it. You can put the data in, see that it's going in the right direction. You know, just having the right tools is part of making it a success.
So I'm going to take the opportunity of having you here, Lisa, as you're a CFO, you're the other side, you're a client of Legerity, but just to share with our audience, just if there's one key thing in your experience why Legerity's approach to solving this particular problem for IFRS 17 is a standout solution for you.
Well, I mean, a couple of things, because I actually objectively picked Legerity well before I had any sort of advisory relationship. I picked Legerity from a host of other vendors, and kind of I'll add a parentheses underneath that. I was actually on some of the design groups for some unnamed large-scale vendors that were looking at these solutions. Literally, I was working on this like 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, where I was actually designing the actual accounting. And so for me, I guess, you know, and you know, they say great minds think alike, right? So the first thing for me about Legerity is it was literally, it had implemented what I had been designing like on my whiteboard. Like when I would draw out how it should work, it's like they had the blueprint, right? So the first thing when I came across Legerity, and what makes that different, I'll get there in a moment, but it was like, yes, that's exactly what we need as an industry, and what, you know, the other solutions, no discredit to them, but they were kind of caught in that linear approach. So they weren't yet delivering that. So what makes it really, truly different is it unlocks the complexity of accounting, and really, in my mind, and we'll talk about this in a moment, it applies it way more than just IFRS 17. It brings all the way front and center debit and credit accounting, or the dualism of accounting, all the way to the very heart of an initial event or business transaction. You know, even though we've done that, I'll say maybe like happenstance in different industries, we've never had full accounting power unlocked out of the ERP, unlocked out of the subledgers, unlocked out of these operating systems, actually doing full transactional accounting for every single micro transaction.
Brilliant. So listen, I know our audience are very interested in IFRS 17. If you visit the Legerity website, the details on screen now, you'll actually see a particular section here in the use case section called Countdown to IFRS 17, where papers, use cases, explainer videos, and I know Elizabeth and all our team will welcome any queries you've got on that. So I'm going to stay with you, Lisa, and I'm going to build on the subject of regulation, and I'm going to build on new regulation in the CFO's office around ESG. So it's front of mind in front of newspaper. Could maybe just set the scene for our audience what ESG is and set the scene for the role of the CFO's office in ESG, please.
Right. So, I mean, right, with climate change and all the things we have going on in the world right now, clearly the frameworks and industry standards are coming together and saying, okay, what are we going to do around environmentally and sustainability? Like, how are we going to track and report? So we've interestingly had, you know, I'll call it like carbon tracking and some things like that. But it's been very, a lot of it's been done through like travel program, like travel systems and things like that. Which what that means is we can't really do things like carbon offsets, and it's very, or there's very clunky operational systems. So what, I guess on two levels, I think of the framework or the standard setting board. And then on the other hand, I think, of course, like how are we going to actually operationalize this and kind of bring it front and center in a modern technology platform, right? Because we all know those little flat statistical data entry points aren't really going to build these robust accounting engines that can power the cloud and do real-time data exchange. No names mentioned. So like on the right hand, I think, okay, the frameworks aren't yet developed. They're coming out, so we don't have a standard cohesive ESG framework. So what CFOs have to be aware of is what's coming out, how is it evolving, and how am I going to have something that is flexible and adaptable enough, i.e. how are we going to set those accounting rules into play as they morph, develop, et cetera. Because one thing I think we definitely know and can agree on in ESG is that it's not going to be this published accounting standard that then we all follow, right? It's going to be a lot of ebb and flow, kind of iterative accounting, I guess we may see for the first time. On the left side of that is, okay, how do we now organically and robustly embed this with the speed of processing in a modern architecture well up front? So again, avoiding these static, you know, if you're an accountant or a CFO, you well know these one-line statistical data entries, which do not give you the robustness of reporting and kind of, I'll call it this advanced, event-driven like power, like you know, 5 steps ahead of your general ledger. So I think that's what people should start to be mindful of and looking out for.
I do love the kind of metaphor of the right-hand side, left-hand side of the debits and credits. It's fantastic. I just want to, look, Legerity have been leading the way here, Elizabeth. So this is on the back of a fantastic podcast that your Jeremy Wood, founder at Legerity, and Mark Miller did with KPMG and Two Magnolias. And they were exploring the role of finance operations in delivering this. Could you maybe just elaborate that for our audience too, and some of the key insights you want to share there?
We've been thinking a lot about how to use, as Lisa says, we're an event-based accounting paradigm and we like double entry bookkeeping. And yet ESG reporting requires all kinds of other data that doesn't really fit that model. However, it also has data that does fit that model. So we've been looking at where we can actually do some double entry bookkeeping. If you take something like financed admissions, you know, where you've got banks that have investments, equity or bonds, you know, in a polluter or in a power station, then actually we can start getting that data and we can put it into a proper ledger. We can also link that back to non-financial data where you've got that, or market data where you've got that. So we're really looking at what the data looks like, what we can do to help you get there, and where you can make it solid and auditable and traceable, make that available to people.
And so this is a legal auditable requirement for companies to report this way.
Yes, exactly.
Super.
Exactly.
So I kind of salt and pepper on the left and right piece here, questions each. I'm going to turn back to you, Lisa.
Sure.
You know, if there's one key consideration you'd like the audience to take away on their journey to being ESG reporting compliant or demonstrating ESG sustainability, what would be the one key consideration you'd like to share?
So I think there's always the foundation of things that every CFO has to think about: traceability, you know, record keeping, you know, compliance and all that. So I'll kind of just take that as table stakes. That's a given. What I would really say, like as a strategic CFO and one that's going to not be like redoing this iteratively year over year, what you need to think about is the real-time data exchange that you're going to need. So, I mean, quite honestly, ESG data is going to come and need to be ingested much more rapidly than traditional period end or month end close. So you need to think about not only the debits and credits and the framework and how are you going to do this? Like in that sense, you're also going to need to think about, I'm going to need to be operating in a much more data streaming model, which we don't typically think about. And how are you going to ingest that now into things like accounting and postings and positions? So for me, that's like the number one thing I would advise CFOs to think
So this is kind of, don't look at it as it's not an end of month problem, it's an intraday problem, it's a real time.
It will be almost like, think of Hulu. It will be like a real time data streaming problem.
And then turning to you, Elizabeth, if there is a second consideration building on this real-time data problem that Lisa just outlined there, what would be the second consideration?
I think for a CFO looking at ESG, I think what I think is most important actually is it's in a state of flux. And I think there are quite a few people building standards out there, working together. We've been talking to the EDM Council today, and there are many others. And I think I would have my organisation be part of, so that you know what's coming, you know what the thinking is, and you can produce a really good solution. I think if people try to just leave it to last, they will probably be a bit lost.
Right, okay. And just some final closing comments, Lisa, if you could share with us around ESG and the perspective and that from yourself, and some final closing comments then from you, Elizabeth. ESG, what next?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think CFOs have to become, ESG, literate. So you have, and not just from the framework, you have got to really become, like, that has to be your, like, data dictionary. You have to know it. Secondly, of course, you need to be thinking about streaming and the rapid pace of it. And I think the third thing I would say is, I understand that most insurers are probably going to have a lot of fatigue right now about, really, we're like just getting over the threshold. No matter how great you are at IFRS 17, you're going to be crawling over that threshold, and you're going to be bobbling as you get your financials and try to deal with your investors and the analysts. So you've got to make ESG a priority in a time when you want, like, honestly, a pause. Like your team wants a pause. I'd say, no, you got to stay on the track. You got to run this one too. So maybe get a new team, maybe invigorate them, whatever that is. But don't forget that this race is running as well.
And I know Legerity had a great success with your clients with proof of concepts and other ways to engage in this topic. How could people find out more about Legerity and ESG, and some closing comments from you, please, Elizabeth?
I think we're really very active. We're doing quite a lot of webinars on it. And as you say, we're starting POCs, and we're very interested in people who really want to, as Lisa says, you're going to have to do this, You've probably got 100 other projects on, but actually this is the one that's visible to the outside world. The world is talking about it. So actually beginning to start is where you're on your journey,
Oh, fabulous. Well, thank you very much. So there was a common theme really we've touched so far in today's show, which is the themes of transformation, digital innovation, the pressures in the CFO's office. We focused on two regulatory pieces here, one IFRS 17, then building it out with ESG. I'm now going to sit down with my guests and really explore the role of the CFO's office in future of finance operations and digital transformation. I'm going to kick off with you, Lisa, if I may. What is the role of the CFO in driving digital, and what does driving digital mean?
Yeah. So, I think that, and I take this role seriously as the CFO. I would say many of my CIOs may not have always liked the stance I took on this, but I believe that the CFO needs to be the driver, like in the driver's seat, deciding the route, deciding the map. And I know, I guess I'll say, to my CFOs out there, I know that it's easy-ish to say, well, that's the role of the technology people, or that's the role of the strategy or the innovation arm. And I've actually been fortunate to serve those roles as well. So I kind of get to look through many lenses. But I think never is there a time where the CFO, you're guarding the capital. You're supposed to be ensuring strategic, long-term foundational investments in the company's future, which by definition means you have to embrace digital, and you cannot make it somebody else's mandate, somebody else's charter. You, the CFO, have to like in essence, be willing to ask the uncomfortable questions, right? You have to challenge and you have to have your own ideation and vision about what that is. And the good news about it is nobody has a chartered map, right? There's no cartographer that knows what digital should or shouldn't look like. So you don't have to be intimidated. Like it's really more of a intuitive immersion process, right? You just have to jump in and say, oh, this is what makes sense to me, which it actually should be quite freeing for CFOs.
Well, just building on it, quite free for CEOs, being the guardians of the budgets. Talk about budgets, Elizabeth. You know, how do you create the business case for innovation in the CFO's office? Where do you start from? This great jumping in bit. What would be the key place to start and why?
I suppose the key place to start is in your sector. Where are people eating your lunch? You know, if I look at banking, there are all the fintechs coming up, you know, people are going to Revolut, or we've been looking at Blue Step Bank, which is doing mortgages abroad, or Lunar, who is using the thought machine technology to build something innovative. You know, people are doing things differently. And if you're sitting there and you know, you've got somebody doing something differently, you've probably got a sort of organization that's thinking about how do we compete? You know, we've lost, I don't know, 3% of our mortgage business, but that's hurting us. It's hurting our bottom line. So there's change going to happen. And while you're doing that, you really need to get the finance change going on at the same time. So if you've got a budget going on for building a better business, a more competitive business, make sure you incorporate finance. Don't try to make a modern, digital, real-time solution and then let finance know at the end, you know, you're going to have a problem.
It's not all about a fancy front end. It's not exactly right. Super. Well, I want to return to you, Lisa, and build on this. So CFOs have to embrace digital. And Elizabeth says you got to, be mindful of the challengers and competitioners out there. Why is transformation or modernization not enough? You know, is there another bigger piece here that folk need to wake up to?
It's just such an underpinning, right? And I actually even the thought of it makes me want to cringe in the sense of, so let me step back just quickly, right? The Industrial Revolution is the byproduct of what we're all living through, right? We live through rote, process, conformity, reliability, credibility, all these things that we've kind of counted on in our modern world have really been byproducts of a process engineering repeatable mindset, right? And so really modernization or transformation is saying, I'm going to take something and make it better, but you're still kind of amplifying the thing that you made better. And horrifyingly, we're actually doing that in our verticals. We're let's do a finance modernization project. Let's do a customer experience project. Let's do a operational modernization project. I mean, in and of itself, it's kind of absurd, right? So by definition, the digital world requires us to think in a non-linear way. It actually requires us to disrupt this foothold that the Industrial Revolution has on our org structure, our functions, our, everything that we do. So when I see things like finance transformation, I'm no, how do you actually do accounting in an intuitive way at the point of event process occurrence? How do you actually not think of it as an accounting function? And that's, I'm an accountant, right? So I think this is why it's not enough, because we don't actually ask ourselves those questions. And we go into these projects and we say, oh, well, how do I, go 5 miles an hour more, or whatever that is.
Well, this leads me nicely, Elizabeth. Lisa says, transformation, modernization is not enough. You're well documented saying that innovation has to happen. It's not an option. So I'd like you to maybe share your thoughts on that.
It seems to me that if you want to stay still, you're going to die. So to me, it's painfully obvious, and particularly the industries we're in. We've just been doing we did a lot of work in telcos, then we did a lot of work in insurance, and we're doing a lot of work at the moment in banking. And you can see in all those industries, the rate of change has been phenomenal. You've got micro insurance. We had people suddenly using mobile phones with videos and games and chat and, apps all over them. how could you possibly expect to stand still and compete? You know, I did a big project at Nokia years ago, and I was really proud of them as a customer. But, you know, Apple ate their lunch, and then Microsoft bought the phone business, you know. You have to innovate, don't you?
So you've got to keep moving forward. So that leads me nicely on to my last question in this section to you, Lisa, which is just, we've talked about transformation innovation being kind of, you know, front to back for the firm, but maybe you could just dwell on the role of the CFO's office in the role of front-end digital change, and maybe just elaborate what front-end digital change means for our audience.
Yeah, so when I say things like at the point of occurrence, what I mean is at the point of engagement with your customer, there needs to be real-time accounting. So I call it like the continual close on steroids. So most people think of continual close as like, well, I'm going to do something more iteratively, maybe like weekly, maybe monthly. I'm like, no, like every nanosecond, like every time something's occurring, it's automatically ingesting and doing the full end-to-end accounting. So the CFO has a huge role in front-end digital. I mean, clearly we just talked about from the strategy part, right? Like understanding the strategy. The CFO is usually on the investment committee, releasing those strategic dollars to be funded, right? So you need to be asking yourself, what are they doing in front-end digital? Are we going whatever, omni-channel, direct to consumer, when, you know, now TikTok is maybe like, you know, State Farm just released TikTok ads as part of the US Super Bowl, right? So like, we need to be embedded as the CFO in understanding all of those decisions, because all of those decisions then have a congruent impact on how are we going to actually operationalize that in a, and I say organic, meaning in a way that doesn't require us to actually then wait a month and do debits and credits. We need to know that real time so that they actually understand profitability and margin almost like at the point of occurrence.
Brilliant. And building on a theme, Elizabeth, sharing your own thoughts on the value of real-time finance.
Well, you know, Lisa said a few things that prompted thoughts with me. I was talking recently with our COO about putting in one of those very big ERP systems, and you know they've got some accounting in there, and why do you need Legerity? And he was like, try changing it. You know, try getting them to do something that's not in their core product at the moment. You know, what you need, if you want to be agile, you need agile solutions. And actually, if you can put that in the hands of the users as well, if you can, we have something called a low code or no code solution. If you can make those changes dynamically without having to have a waterfall project and a BA and a bit of Java code, you know, if you can do all that, then you're probably doing something significantly different. And the other thing that Lisa touched on, which I think is very interesting, is this changing the paradigm. We're working with some players that are really in that fintech, core banking, innovation space, and they have different paradigms. You know, this idea that you've got a smart contract and you've got real-time events, and they'll come through to us, and actually they'll go to the risk people at the same time. You won't be having to reconcile. You know, as our COO said to me recently, there is actually only one transaction. Why are we sending it around the houses before it gets to finance or risk, and then having to work out what happens?
It's one single version of the truth. Fantastic. So I'm going to leave this section, but before I leave this, I'd like you, Lisa, if there's one thing for maybe CFOs tuning in today or folk from the CFO's office, there's one thing you'd like them to take away from our discussion about vision and transformation for a CFO and the role they have in finance operations, what would that be?
I mean, I think it's been maybe implied, but I'll say it overtly. You know, you have to think of transformation as holistic. And holistic meaning, like, so stop transforming your functional verticals. And as the CFO, don't release money to anyone that is transforming a vertical, right, including yourself, CFO, right?
I love it. I love it.
Eat your own dog food.
I love it. The same question to you, Elizabeth, and maybe from a Legerity perspective too, for anyone tuning in, what was the one key thing you'd like to take from this particular part of the discussion on vision and transformation and the role that Legerity plays in that?
I still think the most important thing is to engage and get moving. You know, I think there's an awful lot of talk, the same with ESG. I think that, you know, I so agree with Lisa. Don't do a vertical. Think of the customer, flow it all the way through and just run some pilots, get it moving, and then actually start expanding across your organization.
So this brings me to the last section of the show, which is industry recognition and the recent awards that Legerity have been awarded. The ERM Best IFRS 17 Solution, 2 years running. So Elizabeth, congratulations. Lisa, congratulations. Fantastic stuff. Maybe if you could just touch on, share with us, Elizabeth, Why did Legerity get recognised, and what stood out for the judges in the IFRS 17 solution from Legerity, and particularly maybe Legerity Express?
To be honest, I think Lisa said it, you know, she wanted to talk about what she did with us. Aegon have said it because they want to talk about what they've done with us. So we have only had successful projects, and actually we're delivering IFRS 17, we're delivering Express if it's packaged, but underlying, we've got a paradigm that really will change the way you do finance.
Brilliant. Lisa, just maybe share with Elizabeth, maybe blushing too much, what the experience was like working with Legerity, and why this industry recognition, 2 years running from ERM, a very prestigious award, stands out for you?
You know, it just makes so much sense. I mean, and I applaud the recognition that they actually understand the true white space that Legerity is meeting here. But really for the industry and for other CFOs, you know, looking, it's you know, so many technology projects that we do start as, you know, it's like building a house, like a multiple of like, here's your budget, here's your timeline, we'll take it times 2 or 3 and like, good luck. And then, oh, by the way, here's the big kicker. Triple that for your transition or, you know, stabilization period, which is built into the budgets, but it's not part of your project, right? The thing for me is it was affordable, it delivered in a time frame that was like bar none. No one can beat their timeline. No one. Execution. There was no like, oh, and here's the next 5 years of stabilization. Good luck. You know, short timelines, execution, do what you say you're going to do, which sounds simple. But for me, the coup de grace is, but I actually got something innovative that I was envisioning in my mind that no one else was delivering. So I'm all about laying the foundation for some compliance initiative that you can actually get funding for, and then hub and spoking that into every other aspect of your organization.
Amazing, fantastic. I'd like to build it, because it wasn't the only award that, of course, Legerity won. You also won in Best Cloud Provider. Now, I know that Jeremy, the founder of Legerity, is very proud of your cloud native, your no code, and a digital first wave of the world. Maybe just share the standout elements of your technology that won that award, please, Elizabeth.
We're AWS native, and obviously we can do Azure or Google Cloud or anything else, but we've taken the trouble to take advantage of the tools they have, the security they have, the monitoring they have, the alerts they have. We also have a load of open source technology that they also embrace, that many other cloud providers, for example, workflow, we use Apache Airflow, which came out of Airbnb. So where people have done things differently, we've kind of, you know, not exactly jumped on the back of it. We've made sure it's rock solid, enterprise, you know, caliber. We use Hazelcast Jet, which I adore, which is a modern sort of streaming technology for ingesting transactions and creating pipelines so that you can kind of organize your data for your event processing. And that in itself, you know, we're doing for part of Aegon, actually, we're doing, I forgot Aegon India, another of our many Aegon clients. We're doing real-time streaming of their payments information as it comes in straight in, and doing the accounting. So we've been able to use a lot of these technologies, and many of them are open source. So as Lisa says, everything becomes far more affordable. And of course, you know, in the cloud, it's linearly scalable. You start as small as you need to. You can have some of our projects, if they wanted to test little bits and pieces, they have a new environment up and down for a few days that costs them virtually nothing. So you know, it's really changed the way we run projects.
Finance with confidence, I think, is great.
Yes.
Lisa, I'd like to turn to you for one final thing. We covered a lot of ground today. We covered IFRS 17, the role of ESG, the vision and transformation. If there's one thing from all discussion we've had today you'd like to share with the audience for them to take away, what would that be?
I think it is that as a CFO, you have to think differently about how you're going to deliver strategic value to your organization, as a leader, but in particular with the way accounting is going to morph. It is by definition going to be at the front end of every transaction. So you need to get out of these traditional like ERP isms and really start to strategically think, how do I get to the front?
Wonderful. And Elizabeth, we're coming to the end of Q1 2022. You've had a great start to your already. Is there any key things coming down the pipeline this year you'd like to share with our audience, and any key things to take away?
Do you know, it's interesting. I think the most interesting thing, my head of development might not agree, but people can change rules, they can do stuff dynamically. But one of the things that happens when you're trying to do a calculation, say you're doing customer profitability or something like that, you might want to change the order in which you run things. So one of our clients recently asked me, can I have a GUI so that I can just start changing how frequently I do things and the order I do things? And we've done that. We've enabled one of our clients, a big insurance market, to just press a button and do something. But actually letting people get a bit more inside, look at the calcs and kind of put them together in their own time, I think is very interesting.
Brilliant, fascinating. Well, look, thank you ever so much. What a fantastic discussion. I really, really enjoyed it. So, look, it remains me to thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing your insights with us today. You can find out more about Legerity, their case studies, use cases, white papers, explainer videos, all at the Legerity Resource Centre. Just even to say thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.